Last time, I tried to show you how the essence of the processes changes with regard to changes of relations between this or that power center. Today, I guess we should speak about the configuration of paramount importance, which I think was created in the 13th century. What happened in the 13th century that affected all those states and their people? I'm talking of Mongols. This is a broad topic about which hundreds of pages were written. But maybe this is one of the most perplexing things, and maybe there's no topic as controversial in history as this one. People write a lot about this. You name it. Everyone says that, yes, these are nomads that somehow, out of nowhere, create a powerful army in these deserts in the beginning of the 13th century, in the 20s, and go west to Europe, the Arab world, Byzantium. Something very obscure. Generally, let me highlight that when we talk of nomads, it's really hard to see their role. There's an interesting hypothesis that a lot of people use, saying that nomads are a catalyst for treatment for once putrid sedentary nations. This is an interesting thing. Of course, I don't know what people understand under this, but think that, indeed, in any complex situation that arose in this or that country, suddenly some nomads appeared, and this happened for centuries, speaks for itself. Let's take Shushi's creation as the most recent example for us. It was enough for the Meliks to have a problem with each other. The next thing you knew would be that someone invited a small tribe to fight against others. There are a lot of facts about other times. That's why, I don't know, I'll try to stay away from these specific historical facts. Let me just say the following. Let's see what happened. In 1253, in the middle of the Mongol Empire, which was called Karakorum, the great Khan, who they called Munke or Munke, for some reason convenes the assembly, some sort of a national assembly, that was called Kurultai, and makes a decision. Historians interpret this decision in different ways too, but the goal was to invade the Islamic world. This one is something all of them say. Some of them even say they went to liberate Jerusalem from the Muslims. And this was their flag. And to crown this all, the most interesting thing is that they wanted to do this in alliance with Christians. Already in the year of 56, appears this Munke's brother Hulagu, who was assigned to lead that invasion. A lot of people call that invasion Yellow Jihad or Yellow Crusade. And they come to the region, occupy the main center, Baghdad. They destroy Baghdad, assassinate the caliph, and continue their way to Jerusalem. Then they reach Damascus, Syria. A lot of people claim that the Munke dies, and his brother Hulagu goes back, leaving behind some of the troops. That's it. So what was this? A very surprising thing that a Christian flag, the relationship, and the ultimate goal. But we need to try and understand it, as perhaps there hasn't been a more obscure period in the Armenian history. And Armenians had a big role in that Yellow Jihad. This is what's really interesting for us. Not only Armenians, but Christians at large. This map is of those times. And you see Cilicia, Antioch, and other Christian regions where, sent by Rome from the 11th century, and we have already talked about this, were the White Crusaders. who in this period were already strongly oppressed by the Muslims, this very period of time. Let me remind you of some of the things I showed you the last time, these maps and the situation in these places. In 1071, after the Manasket War, which turned to be hapless for Byzantium, such sultanates were created in this region. We've already talked about this, and a very important thing happened in 1204. Eventually, Catholics occupied the capital of Byzantium and created their own state there. Constantinople was already under their control. The Greeks moved their own state to Nicaea, right next to them. And a very important thing related to Mongols can be seen on this map as well. What happened really? The Mongols were seen in this area several times, but they mainly appeared in Armenia since the year of 36. So there's some well-studied information that they captured Ani, which is a very interesting thing. They took Ani and Kars under their control. What comes to their behavior? Some people write that they destroyed the cities. The others say that they did not. Georgia surrenders and now is obliged to give troops, soldiers, taxes, and other things to the Mongols. They don't touch it. You can see territories occupied by Hulagu on this map. Everything is very accurate. Here's Nicaea, Kilikia, separated in colors. Georgians and Armenians as well. What did they do? They didn't touch any of the Christians there. But how come? We already start to notice that these concepts of the year of 53 weren't pointless. They weren't 1 year or 1 day things. Some things have happened because jihad didn't exist yet. But see, they pass through these territories, enter Erzurum, destroy each and every sultanate here. The Sultanate of Rum, oppress them, put responsibilities on them, and stop. They don't enter Christian territories. And what facts do we have about this? Popular facts, in fact. The things with the Sultanate of Rum happened in 1243, when everything was already over here. In 1246, as it turns out, Pope Innocent IV sends envoys to Karakorum. Why? There are thousands of analyses and thousands of ways, but the fact was they go and offer something up to adopting Catholicism. And what is most interesting for us is that people from Kilikia also go there at the same time. At first, Commander Mkhitar goes to Karakorum, and what is interesting is he signs a treaty. This is well known, that the Mongols will provide security, but again, Kilikia must give troops everything they demand. This is already a contract, a document of a purely contractual form they say consisted of 7 main points. The Khan summons the kings there in person for them to show him their allegiance. He calls everyone that made a deal with him. Only one goes after Kilikia. There's information that Innocent IV, the Pope, who was in constant correspondence with them, was also told to come and meet them in person. And a lot of people say he did. Look at the interesting things we see here. Who invited whom to this area? Whose initiative was it? The Mongols or Rome? It is clear to me that it was Rome, because the studies that have been conducted before allow us to claim that indeed, from here, from the east, they enter and demolish Byzantium, and they invite them to come and fight against Byzantium, which was already being Islamized in the 11th to the 12th centuries. We discussed this last time, and against the main caliphate. But what is the interesting thing here? When I said that in 1260 they left their goal unfulfilled, they did not take Jerusalem, of course. They would go to Egypt to beat the Muslims, known as Mamluks. So he goes back and leaves a small army behind, the majority of which were Christians, Georgians and Armenians, old believers from Kilikia and Georgia, where Chalcedonians lived. But that was the main army. That's an essential factor for us. What happens next? He comes back, people start to rattle. Naturally, the Muslims begin to slay the army. They weaken and retreat to the Caspian Sea. In this area, everyone fights against whoever they can. And Kilikia is in the center. They attack from all sides. They are, after all, the main ally, right? There are attacks from these Mamluks, and from Rum too. Their sultan seemed to be missing. Mongols had taken him away. He also took part in these affairs, but those too tried to take revenge, and such a process began. But what's the most important thing here? Another Mongol Khan, and yes, because this area was a Mongolian Khanate, they were called Hulaids. So another Khan, with a rather interesting name, Ghazan, converted to Islam in 1295. This is the most essential thing. In other words, that anti-Islamic thing came to an end. True, the people of Kilikia immediately try to find a relationship with him, that there's a contract. They said they will keep the contract, so it's not a problem. And to some extent, they did keep everything. Obviously, converting to Islam was some sort of a political thing. Generally, what comes to the Mongolian religion, nothing is clear. People write anything that comes to their minds, but nobody knows a real thing. In other words, if you don't have a clear understanding of political construction, you can't understand what happened to them that made them accept this concept. How to explain this? One says, well, you know, Nestorianism was a common thing there. This one had a Christian wife, the other one did this, and so on. People try to find reasons to see how such a thing could happen, because this isn't a Chalcedonian approach. Historians try to find answers, saying that this one's son was this way, the other son was Christian, so on and so forth, and that's why it is so difficult. But isn't it clear that this Ghazan converted to Islam for political purposes, because a huge area of Islamic territory was occupied? The entire Iran, Central Asia, all the people were Islamists there, and it's more than natural that they made that decision for political reasons. That was a very interesting thing too. So what? Who were those Mongols in general? Did they even exist or not? I do not know. But these things are always described, and the important thing is that these processes still continue. A lot of people say they were geniuses, especially now, Turks, other Islamic scientists, write huge pieces of hundreds of pages, and accepting these processes, they try to present them as saviors of the world, like they were saviors, this or that, which makes it harder to understand what people were busy with in that century. It's normal that, in the end, that Khan, Ghazan, should have taken a completely Islamic side. Naturally, there would be nothing left of the Armenians. In 1335, it can be said the end of Armenians was close, because both the Islamists of this area and those who were already penetrating from the outside, the well-known Tamerlane entered the region at the end of the century. His main enemies were Mongols both in this region and in the territory of Russia. So he would try to slaughter all those who dealt with them, who were their allies. They were demolished the first. It is true that we no longer had an Armenian statehood. Kilikia no longer existed, but it has disappeared in this very period. That was the history. So what happened? Yes, we had lost our statehood. But it is quite an interesting fact that the 13th century, that period of the Mongols, was a century which appeared to be the second strongest wave of the development of Armenian culture after the 7th century. Yes, in the 12th century, as Kilikia existed, as that Chalcedonian union with Georgia was a thing, it already started to rise again, apparently with the rise of the Bagratuni before that. But to achieve such a thing, luxury, power, art was in the time of the Mongols. There were also some religious issues here. When describing the Mongol invasions in that area, our historians write that a strong strife against Chalcedonianism began. Chalcedonian religion in Armenia completely disappeared. I don't know what the reason was. Maybe the Kilikians had a so-called secret clause in their contract. But at that time, it was completely eliminated, and the direction of the monotheists was developing. That powerful development of Khachkar art dates back to the 13th century. Look at these Khachkars. See what they have achieved. Noravank is also from the 14th century. Styles have already changed. Architecture was gaining new qualities. Fine art was gaining new qualities. You can't see such powerful things everywhere. It was mostly in this area, this way from Arax. This Khachkar is from Noravan. It's Momik's creation, 14th century. These are new, typical 14th century churches. We have several of them, actually. Now, what does this mean? This means that, indeed, some changes occurred in religious life. And this was a real thing. There were conditions in that agreement and outside of it, for example, in the territory of Georgia and the territory of Ani. Not only did they commit themselves to do some things, but also received additional things and some opportunities. Churches received estates and were exempted from any payments. It was a very complicated system. In other words, we created conditions for the service that was provided. And that's how the strongest development occurred. But that was also the end of the Armenian high art. These are very dark ages, the 15th and the 16th centuries. Hard to understand. We have to study and see it. But when we look at the cultural heritage, we already see the enormous degradation that took place in the 15th and the 16th centuries. We may give a separate lecture on the status and life of the Armenians of the 17th century Persia, because there again was some rise in the 17th century already in Persia. Hundreds of churches have survived to this day. Of course, it wasn't the quality of the art of the old times, but the scale showed that it was a rise indeed. As far as the Ottoman Empire is concerned, even if I wanted to, I do not know what happened there. No one knows what was there. And whatever you find, even when you find some photos, you see terrible degradation. So this is how the page of the Armenian statehood closed. And worst of all, the pages of high art and culture. What conclusions can we draw from all these stories? The first thing that is really interesting for us was the configuration of the relations between these power centers that decided everything. We have passed those stages. Secondly, Rome. The relations of Rome with Persians after it became Christian and got the name Byzantium. Behold another triangle with Armenians in the middle of it again. Islam, already Constantinople and Damascus or Baghdad. The configuration of the forces changed again. A different situation was created. We saw the condition and the impact on Armenians. Thirdly, the rise of Rome again, the former Rome, and relations with Byzantium. Complete Islamization began in the area. And we, again, fantastically went through this. Rome, the Mongols, all that I said today, all of this. And when we talk about those Russian-Turkish relations, in which Armenia, at least now, is a third party, there was a moment when there was a triangle. It can be again, it can happen again. It already becomes clear how those relations were established. Why you're experiencing a rise and are torn apart sometimes. Looking at these relations, a lot of things become clear. And the second important thing is the question of identity. We saw what was happening to our people when those religious divisions were taking place. How different parts were devouring one another, often becoming allies with others based on identity. It doesn't take a year to accept. Centuries pass. If you are in a configuration for a century, I don't know if you're a Christian, old believer, or I don't know, Chalcedonian, certain relations are formed. And people change values from generation to generation. This is really important. Now you can ponder over this a bit. Of course, we will talk a lot about the identity crisis. This has laid the foundation for the identity crisis already. Until the recent times, when there was that beloved oligarchic system, that lighting candles, the convergence of church, I do not know, there were interesting things, a lot of them. I remember once Manvel Sargsyan made a suggestion to the Armenians of diaspora somewhere to put aside the religious specificities, even language differences, said if we are Armenians, then all of us are. If we are Muslims, we're still Armenian. If we're Catholics, we're still Armenian, and so on and so forth. He offered to come and start a business, get rich, and so would we. And what happened? Even having that close relationship with the church, the Catholicus made a statement that the Armenian is the one who is a follower of the Armenian Apostolic Church. The rest are not Armenians. They're sects. And this is not the first time. I just brought an example to show that even in the convergent system, it wasn't allowed to express any idea that was in verse. And this is their attitude, right? There was a huge amount of Armenian Catholics, Protestants, which today are powerful religions spread worldwide, right? But that dispute is constantly going on. Where does it come from? Isn't it clear where it comes from? From that division in the 11th century. But the people, after going through those terrible centuries, we're still one nation, aren't we? All of us, they say, are Armenians. We all want to be united. Constantly talking about national unity for decades, even in this new era. We all state the fact that we are very prone to conflicts. There is always something to create a conflict from. Intolerance, clashes, and what is interesting, the constant search for some external backers. Where are the sources of these things? Obviously, in history. You see how history finds its reflection in the consciousness of the people. And as a historical memory, generation after generation, I speak of destructive things. It is transmitted, and up until now, it has done the same. And the identity crisis comes from here, doesn't it? Because everyone has their own truth. One says, I'm right. You do not exist. Different people, organizations, religious organizations say, there's one truth and it's mine. Because there are different historical memories and different contingents. This is a significant issue, and lectures like this will allow us to understand the reality better. I often see people write, why don't you talk about the current situation? Things are this way now. And stuff like that. I'm telling you, I speak of these days. I want to find today's problems. What other value does history have? Well, in my opinion, none. It's just there to help me understand why I think this way, why you think that way, because it's impossible to solve the constantly appearing problems with such a consciousness. Everyone tries to say, I will solve it, but no one does. How can you solve this problem if you don't know its essence? This is our very goal, and we will continue. What essential topic do we have? They talk from morning till night. The Turks are friends, they are neighbors. Let's reconcile, let's fight. From dusk till dawn. We're always tired of this, and no one is sure what kind of relationship should be established, or should there even be any relations at all? How can you be sure if you do not know who you are dealing with in a good or bad way? You do not know the essence of the problem. 100 people, 100 opinions. I think if we get to know the Turks, it is worth presenting a few separate topics to understand what the problems really are. And I myself, after studying for decades, was very surprised at how far we are from the reality in those ideas and assessments. I think it will be interesting.